how do we get through to them? There's got to be a way. Should we just shame them? Should we ridicule them? Should we mandate that they stop? No, you integrate the part of you that is like them. And then you understand how that part thinks and feels and what it wants and what it needs. And you give that back, and then they become receptive to you. That's it. That's the whole thing. YouTube channel. I feel like there's a never-ending stream of information that's always within me about this topic, and I just can't stop going back to it. I know not everyone does super well with theory and concepts and can really struggle to understand, like, what's the point? Like, how would this ever have a practical application in reality? So I just wanted to talk about my own experience, which I think is a great example of how political integration works, which is really just general integration. The individual's experiences matter a lot. The upbringing matters a lot. What they have experienced in life determines a lot when it comes to political slant and social understanding and global, all this stuff. I was brought up in a I guess like upper middle class, I guess you would call it, upper middle class neighborhood, pretty far on the conservative spectrum of things, and also religious. So I went to Catholic school, unfortunately, the bane of my existence, and that formed a lot of the early conditioning. From my experience, just observing myself and other people who grew up in that particular environment, you can kind of go one of two ways. You can accept or you can reject, right? I noticed like some kids were having a really easy time accepting it and sort of becoming it, like that like Leave It to Beaver, like thumbs up, white picket fence thing. They were having a really easy time with that, right? Which I call that suppression culture, which is very common with conservative culture. It's sort of one and the same. Sorry if that's offensive. All of this is offensive. So there were the people who had a really easy time. It made sense to them. They adopted it and they went that route. Very all-American, squeaky clean sort of thing. And then there were the rest of us. There was a good amount of the rest of us. And we could not accept that narrative. It didn't make any sense to us. So then you have all sorts of subgroups in there, like the goth kids and the punk kids and the kids who do too many drugs and the kids who, I don't know, do bad in school, and like just all this sort of like rebellious, reactive stuff, basically as an expression of, I do not want that doesn't make sense to me. We're gonna say no. There's this brilliant sociologist who, I forget his name, he always talks about every revolution starts with a no. It was sort of like that. We were in the no phase. So people who are brought up in these environments, they can't handle the tightness of it, like that suppression, that like everyone's the same, everything's the same every day, don't express, don't feel, don't anything, just be, conform. I like to think of this as being a little bit more right-brained, more feminine, more expressive, more sensitive people. We always talk about this. There's a tendency to sway liberal. So that's what happened to me. So while I was in college, I couldn't really understand, I wasn't super into politics, really, but I couldn't really understand anything about conservative culture. So to me, it was all bias, judgment, hatred, rejection of reality, and when I looked at liberal culture, it appeared that everything was just fine and normal. The traits that I embodied and the traits that I approved of in myself and other people were all liberal, of liberal variety. And just quick note, if you want to zoom out real far from all of this, conservative is masculine, liberal is feminine. Plain and simple, right? If you zoom out far enough, that's what you would see. For me, being a very feminine person in general, feminine made sense to me, and I went that route. As I immersed myself, and I talk about this in my video, why I graduated from liberalism, which you can find in my political playlist. I talked about how ultimately I ended up being very, very unhappy in liberal culture, living in a liberal neighborhood, having liberal sort of friends and acquaintances and partners and all that stuff. Ended up being super unfulfilling, and that's that whole collapse of reality where I realized that like this is never gonna get you anything you want. That put me in a place where I was completely alone. That's when I decided that I was going to stop putting off this whole shadow work thing and I was going to actually do it. Instead of just like vaguely learning about it here and there, I was going to actually do it and see like what is this really all about and why is my life so shitty and what power do I actually have? So again, going back to that thing where I talk about, we're all sorted. Being from the generation and the upbringing that I came from, I was sorted into the group where self-responsibility and personal empowerment is sort of a shadow. I was sorted into that group where codependency was not only the norm, it was sort of celebrated. Like people never told me that my being codependent and out of control of myself and unable to put up boundaries and like overly like out of control of my emotions and super reactive and like in pain all the time. Nobody ever told me that I could take action to stop those things. It was like unheard of. Nobody I knew anything about this. So I had liberal sort of friends who were sort of, young and just like me, like kind of out of control, like too much substance abuse. And again, not just telling you my experience. So I had those types of friends. And then I had parents and family who were just like, why can't you just go work for the government? Like, what's wrong with you? And it was like, there was nothing else. When I started doing shadow work and paying attention to all of these triggers in me, all of this powerlessness, all of this resentment, the resentment, the load, the weight on me that was grief and sadness and resentment was crazy. Like it, and the weird thing is that so many people just walk around like this with this giant massive, like I call it being like a sponge. You're just like, you've absorbed so much baggage and bullshit as a sensitive person that you're like a walking dripping sponge. Like you can't change anything, you can't do anything, you're just always about to snap. And like have a break. Like when I say snap, I mean for me that looked like going into a state of depression, going into a state of really disordered eating, going into an alcohol binge or something like that, really negative relationships, super, severe codependence, no boundaries, trauma bonding, all that stuff, which is I would say the norm. Like when I was at that age, I didn't know anyone else who wasn't doing that. Like it wasn't like it was just me being screwed up. I mean, I thought I was doing pretty well, like compared to some of the stuff that I would see other people going through. Like it was just even worse for them because, they had a lot more abuse in their history and no family support. And so they were even deeper in the hole. And so all of these layers started to reveal themselves when I started doing shadow work. And it was just, like I always say, layer upon layer upon layer of pain and powerlessness and anger and, one thing after the other. Shame and guilt and shame and guilt and shame and guilt. It's like a shame and guilt sandwich, right? Of just like total disempowerment. Long story short, what ended up happening, why I'm relating all of this to politics, is when I came out of that, I turned around and I looked at liberalism and I was like, oh no thanks. And I'm not saying like, oh, I don't believe in like equality. There's obviously good ideas in liberalism, I'm just saying that the shadow of it in the culture, like in the day-to-day culture of it, seeing myself and how I interacted with other people, it just became an obvious no for me. For example, before I was like really out of this phase of like brainwashing, I guess you can call it, I went to a couple of protests, and I think one of them was anti-Hillary and one of them was anti-Trump. And I remember the intense feeling of powerlessness standing at those two protests, and the last one, I think the last one was the Trump one, and I remember watching all these people in the streets, and they're all running around, and like a lot of millennials, and they're having a great time, and they're feeling great, and they're like, we're in this protest, and just doing all this goofy shit. And I remember thinking, whoa, like, these people feel empowered by this, and I feel like garbage. I never want to do this again, and I never did. And I'm not saying that everyone has to do what I do. Just saying that those were the kinds of experiences I was having toward the tail end of it, where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't be this pretend caricature of a type of person. The fact that protest wasn't enough for me was a sign that I was moving into a different phase, and that I would never be satisfied with that ever again. I would never be satisfied with that anonymity of the group, right? And this is part of what I want to talk about with the liberal shadow, is this anonymity in the group. You are not in it. Your individuality is not important. It's not valued. It's like, what's the big deal? Who cares? All that matters is that you agree with the group. And as someone who has always been really big on individualism, which again can be argued that that's like a conservative part of me or whatever, like that individual was just like, no more. I'm done here. So that like came out, and it was like putting on a different pair of glasses. Like, it was dramatic. The shift in perspective that took place, where I really stopped feeling like such a victim. I still had some of that, for sure, like, no doubt. I still had some anger, some resentment, some victim stuff, definitely. But it was on such a different level, and I was taking so much more responsibility, and I believed, it was like there was no doubt anymore. I was just like, I'm not a victim. And again, I know that's not the experience everyone has in liberal communities. I'm not saying it is the ultimate truth. I'm just saying this was my personal experience, and I needed to move through that and then beyond that. I moved out of the area I was living in. It almost started to feel unsafe to be there. So imagine like being liberal, running away to this liberal community, and then you start doing all this shadow work, and suddenly you realize that who you really are is unsafe in that community, and you're like, holy shit, I don't belong anywhere. So I was like, shit, all right, I'm gonna run back home to the conservative place that I kind of hate, but like, the weird thing is, and don't worry, this story isn't going to end with like, now I love Donald Trump or something. It's not going to end like that. Don't worry. So I ran back to this conservative place, and I actually felt a lot safer. It was weird because it's like all of a sudden I'm in this place that was traumatizing and I hated, and now I'm back and it's somehow like a salvation. So as I'm unlayering all these layers of like emotional baggage and shadow stuff I didn't know was within me, I'm like having very polarizing experiences. Like, this used to be safe, now it's completely unsafe. This used to be unsafe, now it's completely safe. I started to see all of the reasoning behind conservative ideology and how it wasn't just pure evil. There were like very, very particular reasons why it was that way. I wasn't necessarily like condoning any of it or saying it was good, but it was just very clear for the first time. And all of the fear and rage and resentment and stress toward that group of people went from like 100% to like 50%. Like, it just halved it. It was like, now I understand. And the reason I understood was because I integrated things in myself. And so what I was looking at on the outside changed. And it changed to become more accurate, okay? So before I'd integrated anything, I was naturally sorted into one of these groups. I looked at the other side, I thought they were evil. As I started to do this integration work, naturally and automatically, I started to see all the reasons that they were the way that they were. And it made perfect sense. And I was able to let go of half of my assumptions, and this very oversimplified childlike understanding of the other side just disappeared. And as a result, I can now talk to those people and get through to them. Crazy, right? Like, people are like racking their brain. Like I see people on the internet sometimes like, how do we get through to the other side? It's integration. That's how you get through to the other side. Like, get through to the other people, the people on the other side of the war. It's like, how do we get through to them? There's got to be a way. Should we just shame them? Should we ridicule them? Should we mandate that they stop? No, you integrate the part of you that is like them. And then you understand how that part thinks and feels and what it wants and what it needs. And you give that back, and then they become receptive to you. That's it. That's the whole thing. So now that I've done this first layer of initiation, I had to go and see how I am actually like those people on the other side. And it's actually clear as day to me now that those parts were always in me. They were the ones who weren't having a good time in the liberal culture. They were the parts that were being suppressed. They came out, they expressed, I got in touch with them, I know what they are. I can now relate to these other people on the other side of things because I relate to those parts in me. Now I can start to see even more nuanced, detailed shadow. For example, because I was so polarized to liberalism for such a long time, the pendulum naturally swung the other way. And now I find it very easy to kind of critique and downplay everything about it, almost overboard, you know? And I've noticed this in other people, like big popular influencers. They're so excited to just torch liberalism and just like bash it and say like, look at all those stupid, horrible idiots and their performance and their cancel culture, like they're such idiots. And it's like, these people are like, I noticed, like a little too eager to just critique and criticize and bash all of this liberal stuff. And so that's a new shadow that's kind of arising. And I'm like, why am I so resistant now to this thing that used to be it? So that shadow is sort of pulling me back toward a new set of triggers. All of these conservative ideas that used to trigger me and I would freak out and go like, you're horrible. They actually, it's not that I think they're correct now, it's just that they don't trigger me anymore because I know exactly where they're coming from. When someone's being sexist or something, I don't take it personally anymore because I can literally see that it has nothing to do with me, right? Before, I could not see at all how it didn't have to do with me. And so it's just not my problem anymore, right? So now, coming back around, again, the pendulum keeps swinging and we're always trying to get to center, right? As long as we're always moving closer to center, because center is integration. Center is, I can see all parts, I can see all things, I'm objective, I'm non-reactive. That gives you the most control, not even control, power over your reality, to where you don't need control anymore. You see people freaking out, like it's just whatever. You see exactly what they're doing, how they're polarized, why they're doing it, what values they can't absorb, they can't digest, what experiences they've probably had that make it so that they can't digest those ideas, on and on and on and on, right? So it just becomes, everything becomes very obvious. When you do shadow work, things stop being a mystery. And you'll watch, as you do this, how you move ahead of the mainstream. These talk shows, they'll be having all these debates, like how do we solve this social issue? How do we cure mental illness and depression and anxiety? And you're like, I did that a long time ago. So I hope that gives a little bit more of a concrete perspective of like how this integration plays out with your ideologies. So now I no longer have a need to identify with one or the other because I can take what's useful from both, use them as the parts of me that they are, and I don't have to fight with anyone. I don't have to feel powerless and victimized to anyone. I don't have to pick a side in a war because I'm not fighting a war within myself. So I hope that makes sense. I hope this drives this home for you. And I know these kind of broad statements I'm making can bring up a lot of questions and like, well, what about this thing? And what about that thing? So yeah, I'm happy to talk more about this. If you feel like you're ready to start doing deeper work on this yourself, like you want to move past reactivity and into self-empowerment, where like there's no need to fight with people, there's no need to be polarized, I'm just sitting here grounded in my power, the end. I don't have to be mean to people, I don't have to gaslight people, I can just have power and move toward what I want, end of story. So if you want to start moving toward that level of integration and that sense of power, that's why I offer the one-on-one work, so we can talk about the things that you're experiencing in a more nuanced way that applies to your life. Because everyone has something different going on. Everyone has something different that's holding them up. And these ideologies are just like big picture reflections of different patterns. They're not, they're just giving you an inkling of what's going on with you, right? So if you want to learn more about that, obviously get in touch with me. You can click on the sessions link below. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.